Thank you. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock, and I believe it's starting on time. So thank you all for being here this morning. I am Sanithia Williams, the Stormwater Manager for Richland County. We have other members of the county team here. Want to introduce yourselves? Yes, you do.
Kathleen Hazel. Development.
Stephen Staley, County Engineer.
Kathy Hatchell and Stephen Staley, also with Richland County, who are here, and then we have some of our new development inspectors who are also in the crowd as well. So we are recording this. We're not live streaming it, but we did want to record it because we realized everybody may not be able to be here today. So we will make the link to this recording available later. For questions, I know it's a very formal setup. We try to just do council chambers just so we can have room for people to spread out. But so we can hear you on the recording, if you can ask the question over there, if you at that podium in that microphone. But if you don't want to do that, don't feel comfortable, then I'll just try to repeat the question so that when we answer it, same thing, we'll try to talk in the microphone so that can be captured as part of the presentation and the recording as well. And we don't plan to take up too much of your time this morning. We just wanted to give a update overview. We've had some of these meetings pre-pandemic to kind of go over the changes that we were considering. Not a lot really changed from what we last presented pre-pandemic, but we just feel like it's a good idea to go ahead and just have this conversation again, remind everybody of the stuff that we went through. And I'm going to, screens behind me, so I'll be looking both ways when I try to present to you all. Any questions before we start? Very good? Okay, cool. There we go. All right. So just some background. Again, we're going through the process of updating the county's land development manual. Right now, a lot of our design standards for roads, storm drainage, buffers, things like that is just kind of scattered. Some is in the code, some is in like old drafts of manuals, things like that. We've also got an updated NPDES MS4 permit back in 2016. The construction general permit had been updated. Those requirements were not included in the old ordinance or the old manual. We had some old road design standards that we wanted to make sure we brought our roads up to better design, take better roads in. So we worked through the process of getting all of that stuff included in the new manual. We also experienced the 2015 flood event, and though we cannot prevent that, we did want to also try to make sure we cover any kind of localized flooding issues. So we added the downstream analysis requirement that was not previously one of the county's requirements. And so all of that stuff was trying to be wrapped up so we can have it all in one place. This is not the land development code. So that is the ordinance that kind of draws the zoning and planning and all of that. The code does refer to the manual. The code will say to meet some of the code requirements, you have to do what's in the land development manual. But I just want to make sure everybody understands that we're not talking about the zoning changes. We're not talking about the proposed moratorium on zoning map amendments, all that stuff. That's with the code. This is just the manual that deals with the actual engineering and design standards that we're asking you to build to in the county. So just want to make sure that's very clear. So if you ask me about zoning, I can't help you. You'll have to go somewhere else for that. But I did want to bring that out. And then just to say, previously, like I mentioned, pre-pandemic, we had several internal meetings. Some of you have been here long enough to remember Will Simon starting some of those and those meetings that were consistently that we had previously when we did some updates to the manual. We've had meetings with the conservation group. We've had meetings at the BIA before. We've had meetings here. We've had meetings out at Owensville Airport. Just kind of talk about the different things, the water quality standards, the downstream analysis, the road design standards. So we had a lot of those meetings pre-pandemic. I know the 2020 kind of makes it feels like 20 years went through since we had those meetings, but we did have those meetings. We did take those comments into consideration, and we did try to make sure we included those comments as we finalized the updated draft. But what we want to do now is proceed forward with going ahead and start implementing these new changes. All right, so I'll start with the water quality updates that are in the manual. So we've developed two options for water quality that we put in there. Our permit language is on to the right of the screen. So I'm not going to read that, but that's what the county permit says in those little boxes. And so the black bullets are just kind of telling you what we did to try to meet the permit requirements. And so we put in 2 water quality design requirements. So we're given the option of the 2. We're not saying you have to do one or the other. We prefer one in certain parts of the county, but it's up to the engineer who's doing the design to pick which standard they would like to use. And so the first standard, and I can't click back from over here. All right, so the first standard is to try to infiltrate the runoff from the majority 90% storm. The second standard is to demonstrate a significant 85% post-construction TSS reduction. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But one of the reasons why we wanted to do this is to, number one, give flexibility with choosing the design standards, to look at the different type of soils that we have in the county, meet the requirements of the permit, but then also to improve water quality and address some of the help address some of the anti-degradation requirements that are in the construction general permit and things like that. And of course, also to facilitate trying to be going green infrastructure where we can without saying what kind of green infrastructure to put in, to give the flexibility to decide what type of green infrastructure you'd like to use. So again, this is just kind of a breakdown. And one of the things I mentioned before, in the permit, we have those anti-degradation. If you're 25 acres or more, you got to show the pre and post pollutant, that you're not making it worse, is basically what those standards are saying that are in the county's permit and the construction general permit. So with what we're doing now is that if you choose design option 1, then you're meeting that requirement there, because you're not really releasing anything if you're infiltrating that 90th percentile storm. If you're doing option 2, then you'll just have to, again, demonstrate that pre and post. And what we'll get into the ideal model later. We just need you to show that. So with option 1, you're meeting that anti-deg requirement, that you're not increasing pollution pre and post. If you're doing option 2, then yes, you have to show the 85% TSS, but then you may also have to show us the anti-deg requirement for whatever pollutant of concern. And there is a hardship criteria that's written into the manual, so that if for whatever reason the site is just really wonky and you can't do either, and you can prove to us you can't do either, there is a hardship exemption. But it's not something that we're trying to say nobody has to meet these requirements. It's very specific of how you meet the hardship exemption criteria. So just be aware of that. And so, again, the 90th percentile storm that we're using for option 1 is that you have to infiltrate or filter that 1.4-inch storm within 24 hours. So this obviously works better if you are in the sandy part of the county, have soils that are good for infiltration. If you're doing an area that doesn't have better soils, you may have to put in like under drain systems, things like that. But this is to try to kind of promote not releasing that storm, to treat that on site with that first option. We would ask that you use the ideal model to demonstrate that, which again I'll go into in a little bit in a couple slides. But if you don't use that, you just still have to show us that you're capturing that 1.4-inch and that you're going to have it captured within the first 72 hours of the storm event. Second, again, we're asking that you use the ideal model to demonstrate that you're getting that 85% post-construction TSS. And the reason why we're using total suspended solids is because a lot of other pollutants can kind of attach to the sediment that's suspended. So it can help us out with getting rid of some other stuff if you're showing that you're treating that post-construction before it goes on site, before it leaves the site. So it's kind of serving as a surrogate. If you're in an E. coli area, you don't have to kind of show us an 85% reduction in E. coli. You're instead just showing us that you're doing this TSS reduction. And then we're just using that as a surrogate because there will be other things, nutrients, other pollutants that can kind of attach to that and go off. And so, we get that TSS is not E. coli or phosphorus, but we're using it as a surrogate because you can have that also benefit of by holding that or treating that you're kind of reducing other pollutants from leaving the site. And we also, again, are making this option available because Richland County has varied soils, and so you may not be able to do option 1 in certain areas of the county, and so then this would be the second option to use. So the ideal model is the model that we're asking the engineering community to use to show us that you're meeting option 1 and 2 with water quality. It was a model, it's our preferred method. It just makes it, to us, we believe it makes it a whole lot easier. It's kind of a drag and drop model that we can easily review your calculations, something to make it easier for you to try different BMPs to make sure they're meeting the requirements. And so we're preferring this method. Again, if you have another model you prefer to use, you would just have to show us the information behind that. You may get a little bit more questions about that, but we prefer you do this, and we're going to make this available to you because we prefer that you use this model. And just to let you know, it was developed back in 2002 for DHEC, OCRM, for them to meet the requirements down on the coast. They had a little bit more stringent requirements, and they needed a way to kind of calculate pollutant reduction. And so from there, it's kind of expanded. It's been tailored for specific sites. The screen are a list of some of the other governments within, or entities within South Carolina that are also using the model. The model that we'll be making available to engineers in Richland County is tailored specifically to Richland County. So it's the Richland County ideal model that we'll be making available for you all to use to show that you're meeting the requirements in options 1 and 2. So how are we going to make this available? Because it's a preferred model, what we're going to do is we're going to make one key available for engineers located within Richland County. And so we do have Miranda here with Wolpert, who does have some of the keys. So if you want a key before you leave today, just let her know and she can get you a key. If you are outside of Richland County, then you will have to purchase a key. So we're just making this key available and the ideal model available free to engineers within the county. If you're outside, and we can send this out later, the link, because I know the link, you may try to write it down, but we'll send the link out later. So if you need additional keys, or if you're not located within Richland County and need a key, then we'll make that available to you. But the thought is, and I'll say it again later, is that we're going to have a training specific to IDEAL. Today is not going into all of the how to use IDEAL, how to work it out. That training will be coming next month, but what we wanted to do is make keys available ahead of time so that you can have opportunity to kind of look at it, play around with it, you're not going to break it, and then we have the training. If you have any other questions, you can do that as we go through the training. All right. So the other thing that we added is the requirement for a downstream analysis. And so, again, to the right of the screen is the actual wording from the manual, and the bullet points are just kind of the breakdown of that. If remember pre-2020, there was lots of discussion about the new downstream analysis requirement. Our downstream analysis requirement is very similar to the downstream analysis requirement that's also in Greenville County, so we didn't just pick it out of the sky or just come up with something. We're trying to use a downstream analysis requirement that's working up somewhere else in the state as well. And so what we're asking you to do with the downstream analysis is that you assess conditions downstream as determined by the county, and there's in the language it tells you kind of how we're going to work through that assessment. And if you notice that there is downstream flooding, that you either do something on your site or off-site. So we're not saying you have to fix current flooding. So if you look downstream and it's already flooding, we're not telling you to go downstream and fix the problem. We're saying you can't make it worse. One of the things that we've dealt with, the challenges we face, is new development will go in, and then neighbors downstream are like, I've always flooded, and now I flood worse, or I never flooded, and now I flood. And then it's a he said, she said, pointing back and forth that puts the county in the middle of the developer, the engineer, and what we have to do. And the downstream analysis is a win-win. It helps all of us because we can say, hey, look, we looked downstream ahead of time. This road was already flooding. Here are the extra steps that we're taking to make sure we don't make it worse. Or we look downstream, we realize that, there could be potential flooding. Here are the steps that we took to rectify that. So in our opinion, it helps all of us. Instead of being in the middle, pointing back and forth, we can show a resident or we can show a council member or whoever that we did take into consideration what was happening downstream to try to avoid it. So again, we're not telling you to fix it if it's already flooding, but we are saying you can't make it worse, because we just can't let a new development exacerbate a problem that's already there. And that's up to, in conversations with the plan reviewer and the county engineer, looking at different options and solutions. So, can't answer like a specific, well, I'm building a such and such on this road today, and I can't answer that question today. It would be case-by-case basis, specific to as your project comes in, if we notice a problem downstream. If there's no problem downstream, everybody moves on, we're all happy. But our thing is to not make problems worse. And then there's some updates to the road requirements. And so one of the things that changed was the minimum asphalt thickness got bumped up to 3 inches. So this is something that did come up a little bit later when we got a new public works director who kind of looked at our current standards, looked at some of the things that we were recommending for road standards and the roads that we were dealing with, and to try to avoid that. So that minimum asphalt thickness did go up. We're also requiring, and I have to look back on this one, ADT is required to determine road classifications, so that's something new that's changed, and that's written out in the manual. The geotech must confirm the confirmed rating of subgrade prior to the road design, and then the geotech test requirements is also listed in a table. I think it's page 44 within the land development manual. So we sent out a link. I did not print out copies because this can be thick with all the appendices and everything else, but the email that went out included a link. So if you want to go back and kind of read specifics, you can go back and you can download the actual manual and go through it. If you have any other questions, you can just let us know. But those were the main changes to the road standard that was included in the updated manual.
I'm Kathleen Hassel, New Development. One thing we wanted to tell you guys about the ADT being attached to road classifications is you might have minimum 2 different road designs in your new subdivisions now, because ADT is attached. These 200-acre subdivisions with 15 phases, those back phases may need a, not as sound road design, for lack of better terms, as the very first phase, everybody coming in and out of. So I just wanted to make you guys aware of, at minimum, there may be 2 road designs that are now required. And then the other thing is, when we do our first proof roll, your geotech is going to need to be certified by one of 4 different labs, and that verification needs to be presented to the inspectors before the proof roll can be conducted. So I just wanted to touch base. That is in the land development manual, though, if you guys could go through that and just double check.
Can you say that last piece one more time?
When the proof roll, the first time on your site is going to be done, oops, sorry, Sunitha, I hit the thing. Right there. The first proof roll, your geotech has to prove that they're certified by one of 4 different labs. So, anything else?
All right. So a couple of other things that we just wanted to point out is that the requirement for the, I forgot what the M stands for, universal soil loss, modified, there you go, universal soil loss equation. I was like, I'm gonna forget what the M stands for. As far as doing during construction, several roads control calculations, that's in the land development manual. The stream buffers did not change. I know there was a lot of discussion about that pre-2020. We kind of went back and forth, but we just decided to leave the buffers as is. So your current buffer standards are the same buffer standards. So there was no changes to the water quality buffer standards. Inspections and enforcement procedures, those were also updated to just kind of match the enforcement procedures in the land development code, because they're in the same department. So it just kind of makes sense to have across the board uniform enforcement procedures. So that was something that was updated. And then the warranty and bond requirements. So now there's the 2-year warranty, which had extensive discussion pre-2020 on the changes to that. And then the automatic 1-year extension. I'm trying to read backwards on the glass.
Wondering how you were doing.
Yeah, so I had to double check that. But, so those just kind of things that we had talked about but just want to let you know how we kind of finalize and how we kind of outline the last bit of stuff. And again, the land development language is on the right of your screen. So I'm not gonna read the actual language, but kind of just explain how it's put out in the actual manual. Yes.
Warranty, what kind of, is it?
So the question was the 2-year bond, is it the same kind of insurance for the 2-year plats? Did I repeat it correctly?
Or the same kind of insurance bond that we're able to do for?
Is it the same kind of insurance bond?
Yes, I believe we changed that.
Are you doing a microphone for the recording?
The, GEO is really the mechanism that started all that, and the 1-year extension is the actual bond itself. So instead of us having to write you a letter and say, hey, your bond's about to expire, it's gonna keep automatically extending until you say you don't want it to, or the project's finished. But as far as I know, I don't know of any changes to the actual instrument itself.
Oh, yes. So the question is, with it being 2 years, would there be opportunity for a reduction with that
We
bond?
can look at it.
And yes,
Look at it, you know, be site by site specific.
yeah, site by site specific, they will look at it. Did I say specific?
It'll just be warranty for the infrastructure that we're gonna be taking over.
It'll just be a warranty for the infrastructure we're taking over, and I'm just repeating for the recording.
Okay.
All right, and then just some other quick things. We've just updated language. Again, we've added some needed definitions. There were some definitions in our one manual, definitions in the ordinance, things that were just conflicting. So we updated all definitions will be consistent to avoid confusion. And we've reformatted, rephrased, so it should be easy to follow, easy to read. Not fun to read necessarily, but easier to read and go through than the previous manual and trying to go through the county's ordinance online. And then at the front of the manual, there's this errata table, which outlines all of the kind of specific changes. So if you want to quickly go and figure out, you know, what are some general updates or what are some other updates, it kind of tells you where to go in the manual. So that makes it a little bit easier to follow along with and know what the changes are. So what are our next steps? Again, we want to go ahead and proceed with getting this implemented. The goal is to make the effective date by February 1st of 2022. We'd like to have we have tentatively dated a ideal training on December 1st that will go more in detail on the software, how to use it, how to print reports, things like that. So again, if you're an engineer located within the county, please go ahead and you can see Miranda to get a key. That way you can go ahead and have it beforehand. That training will probably be virtual instead of in person. So it'll be a Zoom link. It'll also be recorded, just like this one is, and made available later to anyone who may need it. And also with the February 1st implementation date, complete submittals that are received before that date will just be reviewed under the current standards. And when we say complete, not half submittals, we're just rushing in something real quick because we don't want to do this. You know, we will be going through that to make sure it is a complete submittal, because if it's an incomplete submittal and it has to get kicked back because it's not a complete submittal, then you're just going to be coming in under the new standards. So if you want to come in under an old, make sure it's a complete submittal that's put in. And then submittals that we already have and that we're already reviewing, obviously we're not kicking those out to start over. So it's just complete submittals before that. Current submittals are still good. And then after February 1st, we'll do that. Good. So I know that was like a quick run through, and so now we'll open it up for questions. And again, if you could ask the question at that mic, or either you don't feel comfortable, I'll repeat it back to you. And then it'll probably just be like a tag team between Steve and Kathy and myself, depending on any questions that may be asked. And I know Gio's coming, but he texted me he's running a little late. Yes.
Would it be possible for us?
Yeah, the question was, is it possible to get a copy of the presentation? Yes. So there's a sign-in sheet over by the door. I know it's very obvious. It's over on that table. But if you make sure you put your name and email address on that, and I'll also just send it out to the same email list that I did before, and we'll also make the link to this recording available. Once it's done, we'll put it up on YouTube, the county's YouTube channel, so that you can then rewatch it as well as go through the presentation. Mhm. Any other? Yes.
That's why she sent the link out when she sent the email out.
And-
You have the most current.
But I'll still go through and verify, because the goal is to make sure the buffer standards stay the same. And so the question was, they noticed some inconsistencies on the buffers, and that shouldn't change, and that is, we shouldn't change that. So we'll make sure we'll do a thorough review and make sure that there's nothing that's mixed out. If there's stuff that you have noticed, if you don't mind just emailing that to me too, so I can make sure the draft that I have isn't including that and we get it cleaned up.
If there were some other things,
Yeah, you can send that to me, but the buffers shouldn't change. The goal, I know we had a lot of discussion pre-pandemic, but at the end of the day, we decided to just leave the buffers as is. Everybody's working with them. We know what they are, so we want to leave them the same. Yes. So the question was, with the water quality standards, is there a minimum requirement to meet those? We're following with, keeping in line with kind of all of the permits, so an acre above has to meet those water quality standards. And again, there's a very specific hardship criteria if for whatever reason, you can't do either one. But with using the ideal model, we're hoping we can make it a little bit easier for you all to demonstrate those new standards. Yes.
So I understand each parcel or project have run into instances. There's been difficult. Ultimately, the goal our site.
So the question is about the ultimate goal with the downstream analysis, and that if you're doing that and you notice there's problems downstream, the ultimate goal is that the release from your property is not higher or increasing that flow. And the answer to that would be yes. Our goal is not to say, we do realize in some cases you may not be able to do something on site or off site or whatnot, and that we're thinking that's probably the extreme where it just can't happen. But our goal isn't to be like, you just can't develop. That's not our goal. The goal is we don't want you to make this worse. So yes, the goal is just to make sure your flows aren't increasing that and making the problem worse than, before your development went in. Not to say there may be one random site where it's like, we can't think of a solution, but that's not our goal to say there's no solution and you can't do anything. That's not our goal. Yeah, and Stephen's gonna jump in too on that.
One thing on that, sometimes, you look at sites, detention areas, and it might not be beneficial to put a detention pond on a site. If you're in the lower part of the watershed, you may be doing harm to the downstream conditions by putting a pond in. So that's kind of, we're looking at it like more the whole watershed, look at the whole watershed versus just what's coming off your site. So, yeah, just want to make that point.
Question. We have to meet the freeze, post-development anyway. So how does that change our design? We analyze the overall analysis, but will that change our design? If our post is meeting our freeze, what are we supposed to be doing different?
But the only thing is you might not need a pond Yeah, I can do that. If you're meeting the pre and post, you know, what does that do? So basically, if it's not harming the downstream conditions, we'll determine a point of interest. We'll look at that point, and it may be beneficial not to have a pond, because you have a good free outfall. You can get to the water course pretty quickly, and not a lot of adjacent properties between the two. That answer that?
Yes.
Yes.
It just feels weird to walk all the way over there.
I know, I'll just repeat questions.
So, and you may have touched on this, pre-pandemic, we had a lot of discussion on formalizing the turnover process and getting that a little more tweaked than it is now. How that process is supposed to go. Is that addressed in the?
So the question was, pre-pandemic, we had a lot of discussions about formalizing the turnover process, and has that been addressed? I know there were several meetings. I'll turn this over to
I
Stephen.
think Gio probably better.
We saw you,
Oh, I
Gio.
saw him walk in. He was working on a little pamphlet that, little quick card to.
The question was, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of discussion about formalizing and streamlining the turnover process at the end of projects. And I know there were some discussions you may have been involved in working on that. Can you answer that question? At the microphone. We're being recorded.
Yeah, what's up? We're still working on it right now. We should have something.
So the answer was they're still working on outlining that process, and we'll have something out before the February 1st implementation date to clarify everything. So that's the streamlined version. Any other questions? Okay.
Can
10:32.
they follow up with some questions after this?
Yeah, as always, the email address open. I think if you were on the original email that I sent out, that's my email address. If you don't have it, it's williams.sanithia@richlandcountysc.gov. I know that's a lot to remember, but I'll send it out to the email list that was before if you didn't have it ahead of time. Please make sure you do the sign-in sheet as well, so that we can send out, once we have this uploaded, the link to the video, the link to the presentation. And if you are in Richland County and would like to get a key, or outside of Richland County and would like to get a key, please see Miranda, so that way you can go ahead and have access to IDEAL and look at it. And once we finalize that training date, that'll be coming out too, from me inviting you all to that training where we'll get more into the specifics, because I'm not a software designer, so I can't answer all that background stuff that you may have on that. If that's it, I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you all for coming out, and just look for the emails with the information coming from us later.
I think that's yours. I think I picked it up. I was about to say.